The night began like any other Friday, soft jazz spilling through the house. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic butter drifting from the kitchen. Ethan Miles had spent hours preparing dinner, wanting the evening to feel special. He'd set the table himself, polished silverware, candles flickering low. The kind of quiet care only a man still in love would bother with. His wife, Vanessa, swept through the dining room like she owned the light itself. That blue satin dress shimmered when she moved, catching every glance from the guests. She'd invited co-workers from her new firm, people who lived in a different world from Ethan's. Suits, perfume, loud laughter. He smiled politely, keeping his hands clean on a towel, trying to fit into a night that already felt borrowed. They ate. They drank. They talked about promotions, business trips, new restaurants uptown. Ethan didn't understand half of it, but he laughed when they laughed. He wanted her to feel proud. He wanted to believe that maybe, after tonight, she'd see he still belonged beside her. But somewhere between the second glass of wine and the third round of laughter, something changed. He noticed how close she leaned toward the man at her side, Chad, her co-worker, the one she'd introduced earlier with that soft, deliberate tone. He's just a colleague. Now Chad brushed a crumb off her shoulder, his fingers lingering longer than they should have. Vanessa giggled. That high-pitched sound Ethan hadn't heard in months, not since she stopped laughing at his jokes. From the kitchen doorway, Ethan watched her eyes light up in a way they no longer did for him. Every smile cut deeper. Every careless touch burned a little more. He tried to breathe, to tell himself he was overthinking, until Chad leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't long. It wasn't hidden. But it was real. The room froze, then broke into uneasy laughter, that nervous kind people use to pretend they didn't just witness something cruel. Ethan's hand tightened around the doorframe. His chest ached like a cracked engine. Still, he walked out slowly, steady as a man carrying a heavy truth. He stopped beside her chair, the laughter fading as his shadow fell across the table. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "can we talk privately?" She turned her head lazily, eyes glazed with wine and pride. "About what?" "Ethan, just step outside with me for a second." She smirked, glanced at her friends, then raised her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "From now on, Ethan, I'll decide when we talk. Stop chasing me." The table chuckled. She wasn't finished. Her lips curled into a cruel smile. "And honestly, I can't believe I ever lowered myself enough to marry a man like you." For a long moment, no one moved. Even the music seemed to pause. Ethan stood there, not angry, not broken, just hollow. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked away. No shouting, no scene, just silence. He went to their bedroom, folded his shirts, zipped his worn duffel bag. His hands shook only once when he looked at the wedding photo on the dresser. He didn't take it. He didn't take anything that would remind him how far he'd fallen trying to make her happy. By the time he stepped outside, the night had gone quiet. The laughter behind the walls carried faintly through the window, her new world echoing in the distance. He started his old truck, its engine coughing before it came alive. As he drove off, the lights of the house shrank in the rearview mirror. He felt nothing. Not rage. Not regret. Just a strange, clean emptiness. And somewhere between one breath and the next, he realized the truth. She hadn't just betrayed him. She'd freed him. That night, something in him died, but something else woke up. The part of him that remembered who he was before he begged for love. And from that moment on, Ethan Miles stopped chasing what was already gone and started walking toward the man he was meant to become. The first few nights after Ethan left felt like floating in fog. He stayed at his friend Cole's apartment, a one-bedroom place that smelled of coffee and motor oil. The kind of space where men nursed quiet heartbreak without saying a word about it. Cole didn't ask many questions. He just handed Ethan a spare blanket, pointed to the couch, and said, "Bathrooms down the hall." That was enough. Some men help you by talking. Others help you by letting silence do the work. Days blurred together. Morning coffee. Cold showers. Long shifts at the garage. The world outside kept spinning, unaware that a marriage had ended somewhere in the middle of it. Ethan worked through the ache like he worked through a seized engine, steady, methodical, focused on what could still be fixed. He stopped checking his phone. The photos, the messages, the shared playlists, all gone. His evenings were quiet now. He'd fall asleep to the hum of traffic, sometimes waking in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, his mind replaying her laughter, the one she'd shared with someone else. At the auto shop, his hands stayed busy. Bolts, grease, engines, simple things that didn't lie. Cars broke, and you fixed them. People broke, and you couldn't. He worked overtime without being asked. The boss didn't complain. A man who buries his pain in labor is good for business. Every night, he'd lock up the shop last. The echo of the metal door closing, like punctuation to another wordless day. Outside, rain became a regular companion. He'd walk home in it, letting the cold soak through his shirt. The smell of wet asphalt filling his lungs. It was cleansing in a way like the world was washing him, reminding him that he could start again if he had the courage to stay standing. One evening, as he waited for the bus, a notification flashed on a public screen across the street, an ad for a luxury resort. He almost looked away, until he noticed a familiar face. Vanessa, laughing, wine glass raised beside Chad. A headline scrolled beneath "New power couple spotted at Lakeview Estates." For a second, his heart clenched. But only for a second. The pain was dull now, more like a bruise than a wound. He stood there in the rain, watching the screen flicker, then turned and walked home. He didn't hate her. He didn't miss her. He just didn't recognize her anymore. That night, Cole found him sitting by the window with a beer, staring out at the empty street. "You okay, man?" Cole asked. Ethan gave a tired smile. "Yeah, just thinking about her." "No," Ethan said. "About me?" He leaned his head against the glass, voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm done fixing people. I'll fix machines. They don't lie." It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. The next morning, he opened the old trunk he'd carried from the house, the only thing he took when he left. Inside were tools, a few old photos, and a worn leather notebook. The edges were cracked, the pages yellowed. His father's handwriting filled them with diagrams, sketches of engines, and notes about efficiency. Ethan hadn't looked at it in years. His father had been a mechanic too, the kind of man who believed every problem had a solution if you were patient enough to listen to the sound it made. Ethan ran his fingers over the pages, tracing the lines of ink like they were veins of memory. That night, under the weak light of a single lamp, he started sketching again. New engines, cleaner systems, designs that didn't just fix, they evolved. Days turned into weeks. Ethan's routine became sacred. Work at the garage by day, design by night, sleep when exhaustion forced him to. Coffee, cold air, the smell of steel. Those were his constants. Cole noticed the change. The sadness was still there, but it had turned into something else: focus. A kind of quiet fire that burns slow but never goes out. Sometimes, Ethan would pause, looking out the window as the city lights shimmered like distant stars. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably laughing in a room filled with people who thought they'd never fall. He didn't wish her harm, but he did wonder if she'd ever realize what she'd thrown away. Still, he didn't dwell on it. The past was just a map of where not to go again. At the shop, his boss began to notice his innovations. He'd modify a carburetor, tweak a circuit, adjust the torque on an engine, and somehow make it run cleaner and quieter. Customers started asking for him by name, Ethan Miles. They said, "That guy knows what he's doing." He didn't seek recognition, but it found him anyway quietly, like sunlight through a dusty window. One night, Cole came home to find blueprints covering the kitchen table. "What are you working on?" he asked. Ethan looked up, eyes brighter than they'd been in months. "Something new," he said. "An engine that doesn't waste what it's given. Like life." "If you think about it," Cole chuckled. "You sound like your old man. Maybe I finally understand him." Ethan replied. Time passed. The pain of betrayal turned into muscle memory, something he no longer noticed. Instead, there was movement. Progress. The rhythm of tools and ideas clicking together. His hands, once shaky from heartbreak, were steady again. His eyes carried purpose. The same silence that once suffocated him now felt like a friend. On Sundays, when the shop was closed, he'd sit on the balcony with a cup of black coffee and that old notebook, adding new pages beside his father's sketches. He wasn't just fixing engines anymore. He was building a bridge between who he used to be and who he was becoming. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds began to lift, and the sky showed a shade of blue he hadn't seen in a long time. Sometimes, rock bottom isn't the end. It's the place where the noise finally stops, where a man can hear the sound of his own heart again. Ethan thought he'd lost everything that mattered, but what he really lost was everything that held him back. That night, he turned off the light, wiped the grease from his hands, and looked once more at his father's notebook. In the quiet, he whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, "Let's rebuild." And just like that, the man everyone pitied became the man no one saw coming. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that made every streetlight blur into gold streaks against the windshield. Ethan's old pickup hummed along the empty road, wipers scraping a steady rhythm. He'd spent the day buried in work, staying late at the shop to clear his head. The rain didn't bother him anymore. It was just another kind of silence. The clock on the dashboard blinked past 11 when it happened. A flash of light too fast. Too close, then the sound, metal screaming against metal. Tires skidding. A crash that tore through the quiet night like thunder. Ethan slammed the brakes. The truck fishtailed before stopping. Ahead, a silver sedan had spun out. The front half crushed against a lamppost. Steam hissed from the engine. For a moment, there was no movement, just rain hammering on the wreckage. Then, faintly, he saw a hand press weakly against the glass. He ran toward it without thinking. Shattered glass crunched beneath his boots. Smoke curled through the air, mixing with the smell of gasoline and rain. Through the broken window, he saw her, a woman in her 40s. Blood streaking down her forehead. Seatbelt jammed tight across her chest. "Hey, can you hear me?" His voice was calm, steady. The same tone he used to talk to frightened customers when their car wouldn't start. She tried to speak, but only a faint sound came out. The door wouldn't budge. He circled around, yanked the passenger side open, crawled inside through the debris, and cut her seatbelt loose with his work knife. She slumped forward into his arms, unconscious but breathing. He carried her out into the rain, laid her gently on the pavement, and called 911. His hands shook, but his voice didn't. He gave the location, checked her pulse, covered her with his jacket until the ambulance arrived. When the sirens cut through the night, Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief. He climbed into the front seat beside the driver as they sped through the storm. In the rear compartment, paramedics worked over the woman, their voices clipped and urgent. At the hospital, the bright white corridors felt like another world, clean, cold, and endless. He stood near the nurse's station, dripping rainwater onto the tile floor, answering questions he barely remembered hearing. "What's your name?" "Sir Ethan Miles." "Relation to the patient?" I don't know. I just found her." Minutes later, a doctor approached, clipboard in hand, his tone urgent. "She's lost a lot of blood. We need a donor match immediately. Her type is B positive rare tonight." "Do you know yours?" Ethan blinked. Exhausted. "B positive." The doctor's eyes lifted. "You sure?" "Pretty sure." Ethan said, "Check it. If it matches, take what you need." He didn't hesitate. They moved fast. The nurse slid a needle into his arm, drawing blood while machines beeped softly in the background. As his head grew light, he caught sight of the woman through the half-open curtain. Her face looked strangely peaceful beneath the hospital lights. Strong, familiar somehow. When the transfusion was over, they wheeled her away. Ethan sat in the hallway, arm bandaged, eyes heavy. The rain still beat faintly against the windows outside. He didn't know her name yet, only that something in his chest told him he was meant to find her. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Around dawn, a doctor returned, eyes tired, but smiling. "She made it," he said. "You saved her life." Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight lift. "Good," he whispered. The doctor paused, glancing at his chart again. "Mr. Miles, there's something unusual. During the transfusion, her blood reacted in a way that normally happens only when the donor and the recipient share a close genetic marker like family." Ethan frowned. "Family? That's impossible. I've never seen her before." The doctor gave a patient smile. "Sometimes life doesn't need your permission to surprise you. Her name's Margaret Hayes, CEO of Hayes Motors. You may have heard of her." Ethan nodded faintly. He'd seen the name on billboards, magazines, parts his shop couldn't afford to order. "She's resting now." The doctor continued. "When she wakes, I'll let her know what you did. I suggest you both take a DNA test just for clarity." Ethan sat there for a long time after the doctor left, staring at his hands, the same hands that fixed engines, that now carried someone else's heartbeat inside them. In the quiet, he thought of all the things he'd lost: a home, a marriage, a sense of belonging, and somehow, tonight, he'd given blood to a stranger who might be more connected to him than anyone alive. He leaned back, eyes closed, and let the exhaustion pull him under. He thought he'd lost everything: his pride, his love, his purpose. But sometimes life rebuilds what's broken in the silence between disasters. That night, as the rain washed the city clean, Ethan Miles didn't know it yet, but life was quietly preparing to give it all back, in a form he never expected. 2 days passed before the doctor called them into his office. Ethan sat across from Margaret Hayes, both quiet, both unsure what connected them beyond a twist of fate and a few drops of shared blood. The manila envelope on the desk looked ordinary, yet everything they'd been was folded inside it. The doctor cleared his throat gently. "The DNA results are back," he said, his voice even but warm. "There's no doubt. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Miles, your mother and son." For a moment, the world stilled. The air, the hum of machines, even the light itself seemed to hesitate. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, trembling. Tears welled instantly, the kind that come not from pain but from recognition too deep to name. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stared at her, searching for a resemblance, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, and suddenly, he saw it. Himself. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and breaking. "You were 3 years old," she whispered. "We were at the park. I turned my head for one moment to answer the phone. And when I looked back, you were gone. We searched for months. The police found your shoe by the river, but no trace of you. They said you'd drowned." She wiped her eyes quickly, shaking her head. "I never believed it. Every night for years, I'd dream you were somewhere alive, waiting for me to find you." Ethan swallowed hard. "I grew up in an orphanage," he said quietly. "They told me my parents didn't want me." Her face broke with grief. "Never. I would have given everything to hold you again." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all the years that should have been. Full of lullabies unsung. Birthdays uncelebrated. Questions unanswered. She reached across the table, her fingers finding his hand. He didn't pull away. In that small touch, something in him shifted, not the loud kind of forgiveness, but the kind that sinks in slowly, like warmth after a long winter. Later that afternoon, she took him home. Her mansion stood on a hill overlooking the city, all glass and stone. Silent fountains. The kind of place Ethan never imagined himself in. Yet as he followed her through the long halls lined with family portraits, he stopped at one. A small boy, smiling beside a young couple. The same brown eyes. His eyes. "That's you," Margaret said softly. Ethan stared at the photo for a long time. And for the first time in years, his chest felt light. He wasn't lost anymore. Over the next weeks, she introduced him to her world. Engineers, investors, designers, people who saw in him what she'd always hoped to find again, her son's spark. She helped him turn his sketches into blueprints, his blueprints into prototypes, his prototypes into a company, Miles and Hayes Technologies. He spent years fixing what was broken, not knowing he was the one who'd been missing. In finding her, Ethan didn't just discover his past. He discovered a future big enough to hold all the love he'd thought was gone. A year passed like a sunrise, slow, steady, unstoppable. What began as sketches in a worn notebook became engines, humming under glass ceilings and bright lights. Miles and Hayes Technologies had become more than a company. It was a symbol. The first model, a compact electric engine built for endurance, rolled onto the stage at an industry expo in Chicago. Cameras flashed. Investors leaned forward. Journalists called it a breakthrough in efficiency. Ethan simply called it honest work. He stood there in a tailored charcoal suit. Quiet confidence, replacing every ounce of pain that used to live in his chest. His voice was low, deliberate. Every word measured. "We didn't reinvent the wheel," he said. "We just reminded it why it was made to turn." Applause erupted. But he didn't bask in it. He just smiled faintly, shaking a few hands before stepping aside, letting his engineers take the spotlight. That was who he'd become, steady, humble, focused, behind the scenes. Margaret watched him with pride that couldn't be contained. The boy she'd lost had returned as a man who carried grace like armor. Their bond had deepened into something unspoken yet constant, a presence in every meeting. Every morning, coffee shared before work. The success came fast. Partnerships with major automakers, articles in business magazines, interviews on morning shows. The name Ethan Miles began appearing next to words like innovation and resilience. But he never forgot where it all started: the smell of grease, the sound of rain hitting an old garage roof, and the silence that used to fill the space where his marriage once stood. When his first $1 million check cleared, he didn't buy a yacht or a mansion. He bought the small, rusted auto shop where he'd once worked double shifts to numb the pain. The sign was still there. Letters faded by time. He walked through the place alone one evening, touching the cracked workbench, the worn stool, the walls that had heard his quiet prayers when life had fallen apart. Then, with a deep breath, he smiled and whispered, "Let's make this place mean something again." 3 months later, the shop reopened not as a business, but as a training center for young mechanics. Kids from the neighborhood came to learn for free how to use a wrench, how to listen to an engine, how to stay patient when nothing seemed to work. Ethan would drop by every weekend, sleeves rolled up, teaching them the same way his father once taught him, by example. Not lecture. He'd tell them, "Respect the machine, and it'll tell you what it needs." Same with people. Same with yourself. The local paper wrote a feature calling him the mechanic who built an empire and gave it back. He didn't even read it. Praise was just noise. The real reward was watching a 16-year-old kid fix his first engine and grin like he'd found his purpose. At night, Ethan often stood on the balcony of the new headquarters, a tower of glass and light bearing his name. Below him, the city moved like clockwork, unaware of the man who once drove its streets broke. Heart shattered. Sleeping on a friend's couch, he'd breathe deep, feeling that same quiet power that came from surviving without bitterness. He didn't build success to prove her wrong. He built it to prove himself right. Because real strength isn't about revenge or noise, it's the calm that comes when you know you've already won. The man who once fixed other people's engines now built the ones that drove the future. And the best part, he never stopped being the man who got his hands dirty. Time has a quiet way of turning the tables. What was once humiliation had become history. And the man who once walked away in silence now stood atop the world he built with his own hands. One morning, as Ethan poured his coffee in the corner office of Miles and Hayes Technologies, a magazine lay open on his desk. Across its glossy cover was his own face. The headline, bold and certain, "Ethan Miles, the man who reinvented the American engine." Across town, in a small apartment with peeling paint and no furniture but a mattress on the floor, Vanessa saw the same cover. Her hand trembled as she traced the picture, the same man she'd once mocked. Now everything she'd claimed he'd never be. Chad was long gone. He'd drained her savings, vanished with her credit cards, left behind only debts and shame. The friends she'd once laughed with no longer answered her calls. Pride had eaten through her like rust. Desperation leaves no room for dignity. So one gray afternoon, she stood in the marble lobby of Ethan's company, the same company whose name now shimmered on every billboard in the city. Her clothes were faded, her eyes hollow. The receptionist hesitated before calling upstairs. Minutes later, 2 security guards escorted her to the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan was waiting. He didn't flinch when he saw her. He looked calm, almost kind, the sort of composure that only comes from peace. Her voice cracked. "Ethan, I have nowhere to go. I'll clean. I'll do anything. Just help me." He studied her face, the woman who once told him he wasn't on her level. Now standing before him, with nothing left but regret. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then his voice came, quiet and steady. "You once said you'd decide when we talk. Today, I decide. And we're done." She started to speak, but no words came. The guards stepped forward gently, guiding her back toward the elevator. As the doors closed, her reflection lingered in the glass, small, broken, and fading. Ethan turned toward the window, watching the city stretch beneath him. There was no hatred in his eyes, no triumph, just peace, the kind that doesn't need an audience. He didn't need revenge. Life had already delivered it. The difference between her and him wasn't luck, it was what they built when everything fell apart. The sun dipped low, painting the skyline in amber light. Ethan stood on the rooftop beside Margaret, the city humming far below. The name Miles and Hayes glowed across a tower in the distance, a beacon born from ashes. Margaret smiled softly. Your father would be proud. Ethan nodded. Maybe he finally sees I became a man not through revenge, but through grace. The breeze caught his tie, carrying the faint scent of rain and metal. The same mix that had once defined his struggle. He looked out over the city that had once forgotten him, now whispering his name, men. Remember, sometimes walking away in silence is the loudest victory. You don't need to destroy them. Just outgrow them. Let your peace make the noise they'll never forget. He smiled faintly. The kind of smile that comes only after a long war with yourself, the one you finally win. And as the light faded, the voice of the narrator softened one last time. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story of strength, love, and quiet redemption.